Lesson 110, the Roman Army.
So, Bill, I think just about everybody knows that the Romans are famous for conquering the area around the Mediterranean.
And I think that just about everyone at one time or another has seen a Roman soldier in a movie or in a picture or in a book somewhere.
Right, so why don't we talk about the kind of Roman soldier that people most often see? That's the late Republican, early imperial soldier, after the reforms of Gaius Marius. Why don't you just say a minute who Gaius Marius is and what the transition from the early Republican army was to the one after 107 BC?
In this lesson, we want to tell you just one or two big important concepts about the Roman army. And one of the most important to know about is the big change that took place in the way the Roman army was organized. You know, in the old days of ancient Rome, they were basically just farmers, an agricultural community. They didn't have a professional standing army.
Right. So what's the difference between an agricultural community's army and a professional standing army? Because a professional standing army is what we have today, right?
Yes, that's right. But in the ancient world, people couldn't always take that much time away from their crops and from their farms. They needed to be growing food.
That's right. Most ancient civilizations were agricultural societies.
And so they would get together troops to fight a conflict on an as-needed basis. And that's what you call a militia.
Exactly.
And that's the way the Roman army started out, is as a militia. They would just call up soldiers to form an army on an as-needed basis, and then when the conflict was over, they would all go back to their normal lives on their farms.
Right. So what did Gaius Marius do to change that situation?
Marius made a lot of improvements to the way the Roman army was organized, but these improvements came at a price. He turned the army into a professional standing army that was ready to fight at any time, and he also instilled a lot of discipline in them. The problem with that is that you have to pay soldiers.
That's right. And who's paying them will become very important, won't it?
Yes, and so the soldiers in a given army depended on their leader or their general to pay them. So this would at times create a situation in which the individual soldier felt a particular loyalty to the general who was his leader, not so much to the Roman state.
That's right. So a generation later, when the Senate didn't allow Julius Caesar to come back from Gaul in modern-day France to try to be elected consul, the highest position in Roman government, he called upon his troops to be loyal to him and march on Rome rather than be loyal to the Roman state itself.
So, in short, this started a civil war in which you have Roman soldiers fighting against other Roman soldiers. And so the generals in charge of these armies became sort of like warlords, just seeing who could bully their way into power. So the reforms of Marius, that Marius made to the way the army worked, they were improvements in one sense, but they also led to a lot of problems within Roman culture.
Right. Well, now that we understand the way in which the reforms affected the Roman army and Roman society, why don't we talk about some of the equipment and reforms themselves that we have here on the page, in particular about the gladius, the scutum, and what we'll call the testudo formation.
Well, in getting started with Latin, the first book, I introduced you to the word scutum and to the word gladius, and so you used those words to make sentences and read sentences. Gladius means sword, and scutum means shield.
That's right. And we can use those words to generally mean sword and shield, but when a Roman said gladius and a Roman said scutum, they had a very particular mental image in mind, which you can see examples of here at the bottom of the page.
That's right. We want to get a little more specific about it here. Some of you, when you think of the word sword, you might think of, and I know I do this, I often think of a long sword, like the kind of sword a medieval knight might carry.
Right, a man on a horse and big heavy armor charging into battle.
But a gladius is not like that. A gladius is a short, stubby kind of sword with a pointy tip. And really, the way that the ancient Romans would use this is for thrusting forward not for slashing, not to try to slash or cut someone with the side of it, but instead to thrust it forward to try to stab straight ahead.
That's right. The Romans were famous for their discipline, and that meant marching in formation. And if you're marching in a tight formation, you can't wave your arm all crazy, slashing here and there. You need to aim at whatever target is directly in front of you so that you maintain what's called unit cohesion.
Right, if you start flapping your sword around from side to side, you might hit the guy next to you. So you can't do that. And that leads me to my next point, which has to do with the scutum, that is the shield. And if you look here at the diagram, you'll see that a scutum was a large shield with a curved sort of shape, and it was big enough for a soldier to crouch down behind. It wasn't just a small circular shield. It was kind of a tall shield that if a soldier set it down on the ground, it might come up to his waist or higher.
That's right. And let's tell them a little bit about the testudo. First, Bill, why don't you tell them what the word testudo means in Latin?
Well, testudo means tortoise, doesn't it?
That's right.
And of course, we all know a tortoise has a hard shell. So why would they have a maneuver, Michael, called a testudo? What does that have to do with having a shell?
Well, a line of Roman soldiers could have a group that held their shields out in the front, that held their shields over their head, and that held their shields to the side, could march as one, and that way, if enemies were slinging rocks or hurling arrows or standing on battlements, they would be blocked and protected from those things up until the point where they got to their destination.
Sort of like in the same way that a turtle shell protects a turtle.
Exactly.
Before we leave this lesson, I want to mention one last thing, and that is that when the Roman soldiers were standing in a regular formation, they would park their shields next to each other and form a kind of a shield wall.
That's right.
Which made it very hard for the enemy to come at them and penetrate through that shield wall. It made the Roman army a very formidable opponent.
Right, and not only will this make them powerful, but it will also make them intimidating. If you see a line of men in big metal, what are essentially shells, coming towards you, they seem very, very formidable.